This particular reading is always, there's many aspects to it that are somewhat contradictory on the surface, and I've always struggled with it a little bit, partly because of my own nature, of course, or perhaps entirely because of my own nature. I mean, what else do we have but our own nature? Everything happens because of who we are. But also because of the way Swami Kriyananda at least worked with me. Now, bear in mind, I have to now qualify everything. I say it, then I'm going to qualify it backwards. Swami Kriyananda worked very differently depending on who he was with, depending on what was going to help them. A few days ago, when we were celebrating the anniversary of Swami Kriyananda's discipleship, meaning the day he met Paramahansa Yogananda, September 12th, 1948. And I was commenting from some of the notes that I have, how the specific reference was this. Someone said to Swamiji, isn't the first thing you have to cultivate on the spiritual path the quality of being nice? And Swamiji said, well, eventually that's a good quality to develop. But he said it's not the first quality. Because the first thing you have to do is you have to become authentically in touch with yourself. And he said you have to start with whatever you already are. And so whatever quality you have, whether it's willpower or intelligence or devotion or service or just energy, you start with what you already have, and then you refine it. And the image Swami used is we're trapped like in a balloon that just holds us within our own self-definition, and we sharpen whatever quality we have, and then we can pop the balloon. And once we pop the balloon at any point, then that allows us to expand into everything else. So eventually, maybe, we'll also become nice. But I've had to say on many occasions that there are 8 manifestations of God, and being nice isn't one of them. Being appropriate is one of them. And sometimes it's appropriate to be nice, but not always. And so we do get confused. Just to finish, for some of you I'm repeating this, but I also found I was away in August and I was beginning to put other of my notes into a book about Swami. And he described this experience he had with the abbot of the Catholic monastery in Carmel, Monterey, where Swamiji stayed for 6 months right after he was expelled from SRF. So that would have been 1962 or 63. He lived for 6 months in that Catholic monastery because he'd been 14 years in a monastery. And it was a comfortable place for him to figure it out. He became very good friends with the abbot there, to the point where the abbot had Swamiji initiate him into Kriya Yoga. And he took Kriya in the name of Jesus Christ, which is perfectly reasonable to do. Christ is on the altar. But the abbot and Swami became very good friends. And the abbot was saying to the Swami, the difficulty is, he said, in an established order like his own, like the Franciscans, like the Benedictines, all these hundreds of years later, the form is so clear to people that, in this case, young men or men come into it and they see what they're supposed to be. And then they start molding themselves to be what they're supposed to be. And he said, and often it never actually grows from inside them. It never is really the flower that we're supposed to be. On the altar today, as you can all see, today is Marigold Sunday, apparently. And also just behind it are those beautiful green things, whatever they are. They're just absolutely lovely, all of it. And each one of these little flowers, the green thing, whatever it is, it didn't look around and say, oh, who am I supposed to be? It just followed its own inclination, and that's who it became. And this is one of the most challenging aspects of the spiritual path, is to both become aware of how God actually made us and intends us to be, and then to have the clarity of mind, and in often cases the courage, to just put aside whatever it's our upbringing, our lifetimes of who knows what happened to us, or just the sheer lack of energy to be able to really parse apart all the confusion. So this was bringing me back to where I am. Swami wrote this, of course, so I have to also count this as part of the story. I can't reject it because it's his. I'm stuck. But this has always worked for me. I start with the premise that the chances that Swami knows what he's doing is pretty high, and the chances that my alternative point of view is accurate is pretty low. It's just over years of experience, I've figured that out. So he says intuition, intellect. He says intuition is simple, intellect, he uses the word complex for intellect. At the same time, I've never in my life met anyone with a higher intelligence or a more extraordinary capacity to express the teachings. Nor do we see in any aspect of Swami Kriyananda's life a sort of, oh, well, that's just the mind, oh, that's just the intellect. I mean, just this morning, getting ready for the class, I pulled out Swami's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, which I can lift with one hand, but it's easier to lift it with two. And you read through that, and he takes these verses and it's all, and this is also important, it's all what Master said about it. Master didn't just sit around and chant Om. And when he was being trained by Sri Yukteswar was very, very exact in what he wanted him to understand. And Master wrote this great commentary on the Gita, and Swami, as a young monk, went through it, quote, helped him edit it. Swami sort of smiles a little bit, but Master was training him. Years later, decades later, Swami sat down, started running through the Gita, could remember every idea that Master presented, and then wrote this extraordinary commentary. So he's obviously not against the power of our, and this is the word I came with finally, the power of our intelligence, okay? So we have the word intellect and we have the word intelligence, and these words are very closely related, and I had to laugh just sitting here thinking, oh dear, she's going to get up. We're supposed to be talking about intuition, and she's going to give such an intellectual discussion about it. But I mean, I live in Palo Alto, for heaven's sakes. We're all the same here. You know, this is why we're here. This is why Swami sent me here, because I vibe with what goes on here. And this is a very real issue, because sometimes we get confused. But we think somehow that if I'm thinking, if I'm trying to understand with my intelligence, that somehow I'm not being intuitive. And Swamiji put a very strong point on this at one point. Now, bear in mind, of course, these are the things I remember. You got someone else up here of a different temperament, and they're going to have a whole other list of things. But this is what I remember. He said, far more than most people realize, their intelligence is guided by their intuition. So the juxtaposition, despite Swami's title, the juxtaposition, what Swami put next to suffer little children to come unto me is the carping spirit. And the carping spirit is the complete misuse of intelligence. There was a friend of mine, very good friend of mine, and he was always, I think how to say it, he was always protecting himself a little bit. He was always making sure that he was the first one to point out what was wrong with the idea. I grew tired of it after a while, and I basically asked him, why? Why do you always have to be that way? And he was very honest. And he talked about how, because he had a very high intelligence and very high education. And he said, because I was raised in a family where it was very important always to be shrewd. That was the word he used. And it's a particular American quality. specifically, that we're practical and we can see through it. And one of the, not in this room now, but over many, many, many years of going around and speaking in many cities in the United States, Americans also have, just now we're such a multicultural mix, you can hardly say it to any room, but Americans also have a great deal of heart. Swamiji was fond of saying when America and Russia were in a competition to see who could get to outer space or get to the moon first, somebody suggested that what Americans should do is they should figure out how to get a dog to the moon, and then not necessarily how to get him back, because the entire country would become so upset about that poor dog out there that all the resources of the country would go to get the dog back. And it's a humorous way of talking, really, about that aspect of the American character, because there is a great deal of heart. So what I have often watched, both with myself and especially with Swami, people would be very touched and very, they would just swear that their lives had been changed, and they would join our community and we'd see them every week, and they were going to move into our houses, and that was it. And then they would go home and they would think, but how do I really know? How do I really know what's going on? And then you'd never see them again. That's what Swami's talking about. He's talking about when the open-hearted experience like a child tells us something that we know to be true, and then the intellect jumps in and tries to pull it apart. And it's not the intelligence of understanding these teachings in this particular translation of the Gita verse, which is different in Swami's commentary. It has the phrase, grasp it with the intelligence, with the intellect, and understand it with the heart. But that phrase, so I was, great, now we have it. But I opened Swami's book, which has Master's translation, and there's no reference at all to that. Okay? But it is there somewhere, it's implied. And what we have to understand is this. Years ago, there were two people in my life, two women that I had to work with very closely, one of whom I had perfect, happy karma with. I just adored her, and we were soul sisters. This was Seva, the woman many of you know. For like 10 years, we were just like Siamese. We were always Siamese twins. We were always together. I loved her effortlessly. The other woman, not so much. The other woman had been a karmic enemy in multiple lifetimes. And so I said to Swami, I had it all figured out. I mean, really. And this is, again, how Swami worked with me. Of course, I compelled him in this case. I said, sir, the problem is not so much that I dislike this one so intensely. It's that I love this one too much. So if I loved this one less, it would kind of even the whole thing out. I actually presented this not as a joke. His patience also deserves a great deal of credit. I believe, he said this to me, I believe, on 2 or 3 occasions. I think this was the first, this exact phrase. That is the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And his point was, his point was the one I started with today. You take what is positive and you bring everything else up to that. You don't try to squelch the flow that you have right now in order to even everything out. You just go with your strengths, whatever that strength might be. But you recognize that we're a little out of balance. But every time I was with Swamiji, and one of the reasons it was such a joy to be with him, is that you couldn't get away with it. You couldn't just say some sort of half-baked idea that just sounded good when you were saying it to yourself by yourself, or that most other people would just nod sagely and say yes. He demanded full consciousness, complete wakefulness. And it wasn't that you could just be low energy over here. He was always, in a very gracious way, in 45 years, he only said to me 2 or 3 times, "That's the stupidest idea I've ever heard." And since it was an absolute statement, some of them were second and third in that, but nonetheless, but there was always this, he was absolutely wide awake. He was wide awake for that which will draw us closer to God. And I think when someone said to Master, I think the phrase was, "Does God know evil?" Whatever that's an intellectual phrase. That's the intellect asking questions there, not intelligence necessarily. Does God know evil? And Swami and Master said, well, he would have to be exceptionally stupid not to. Just like, let's be clear about what we're actually saying. And I have watched over so many years, especially somehow when I've been traveling this last year or two, because I've been in so many situations where people ask me questions. So much of the time, and these are very sincere conundrums people are facing. They say, well, inasmuch as the moon is made of blue cheese, what are we going to do about the rats eating the moon? And I say, well, your premise is wrong. It isn't made of blue cheese, really. And of course, how would you know? And the question is never about the moon and the rats and the cheese, but there's some premise. Inasmuch as karma operates this way, inasmuch as God wants us, inasmuch as the first and most important quality is to be nice, what do I do about this abusive person in my life? But your premise is wrong. But how do we know our premises are wrong? We have to exercise all parts of ourself, but intelligence must be guided by the feeling of it. You see, that's what he's trying to say. I was thinking about an interaction, many interactions I've had with people, where I have been the one in error, and others have been in error toward me, on both sides, but for the same reason. Here we are, maybe somebody's having a difficult issue in their life, trying to understand something, or is doing the best they can. And so that we're having a conversation, and there's an intellectual idea I could offer that may be the accurate answer. But if I'm not following the feeling also of what's going on, then the intellect just leads me down a place I don't want to go. I used to think of this, I remember once I was in a circumstance and I was very involved in something with a lot of emotion. And naturally, that emotion led me into not being even-minded about the result. And someone said something to me like, well, you mustn't get attached. And I just... I wouldn't be in this position if I weren't attached. Tell me something helpful at this point. And I began to dub that. It's called true but irrelevant. And you see, that's what the intellect does in the way that the Gita is speaking against it. It's true, but it's not relevant. It's not relevant to where we're really trying to go, which is we're really trying to expand our consciousness and get closer to God. This is what the carping spirit is. And the carping spirit is a lot like my friend. Well, we got to be shrewd. The most important thing is to make sure that nobody takes advantage of us. So even though I feel this, I got to be careful here all the time. That's the misuse of it, and that's not intelligence. That's just the intellect spinning, thinking of this, thinking of that, thinking of this, thinking of that. But when Swami's writing his books, trust me, intelligence and intuition are working together. That Gita commentary that I'm talking about, he wrote that in, I believe it was 2 months. He himself, it was just, he couldn't believe it. He was in India, and during that period of time, it might have been 3 months, 3 whole months, 600-page book. I think there were 30 different people who came to visit him during that time. I being one of them, so I remember it. Every single day he wrote 10 pages on that book, and he related to all his visitors. He went out for tea, he went out for coffee, and no matter, somewhere in the day, he would sit down and he would write 10 pages of that book. And it was intelligence and intuition, just in that flow. So what we have to make sure is that everything that we do is not just us spinning like this, but we must apply our intelligence to understanding the path. Why would Swami have written 140 books? And why would he have slaved over those books? I was looking, someone was asking me what I have of relics of Swami Kriyananda, and they're sort of stashed all over my house, and I kind of forgot. And suddenly I remembered and opened this cabinet. There's that much paper there. And what that paper is that when Swami would write, he would type at first, and then he had a computer, but he'd print out pages. He would always do his editing on a page, or his final editing, he would read it, and then he would mark it with a pen or a pencil. And especially what I had there, Keshava Taylor and I were both working for Swami Kriyananda at that time, and Swami would edit these pages. When he was finished, he'd just throw them in the trash can. And one day we both looked at those, and so we started taking them out of the trash can. So I've got like this of just pieces of paper that Swami marked on. And he couldn't consider a page of his writing finished if there was so much as a punctuation mark changed. I mean, when he was writing The Path, the first round of The Path, it was the last book he wrote without a computer. So I typed it. I was his manuscript typist. I typed it over and over and over. One page, one comma, I'd have to type the whole thing. Now, and was that intellect or was that intuition? It was intelligence and intuition. Because how did he know? It wasn't like, oh yeah, this one is good and that one is bad and this one is good and that one is bad. He would just feel it like that. But he could feel it with such clarity of mind. Is this consistent with Master's teachings? Is this what Master told me? And he happened to be highly educated and multilingual and all those things, but that wasn't really it. Actually, I'll tell you the last here. When I first heard Swami speak, the first thing I thought when I saw him, I felt his consciousness and I wanted it. He was the first individual human being I'd ever seen that I wanted to be like. So the first thought was, this is who I'm trying to be. Then he gave a talk. As it happened, it was right over here at Stanford. He gave this talk. I don't remember anything he said, except I remember thinking, this is the most intelligent man I've ever met, which was sort of like, oh, that'll make it so much more fun. Intelligence is my hobby, is how I've always thought about it. It's one of my, Swamiji and I used to call it my petty enthusiasms, like this. But when I was with him, especially in the beginning, he wasn't just intelligent, he wasn't just brilliant. He didn't just know Greek myths and 5 languages. None of that actually described it. He was just so capable of seeing reality as it was. You see, that's what intuition is. He was so capable of perceiving reality. And I would ask myself, what is the secret of what the word for it is? Wisdom. What is the secret of his wisdom? When he was younger, he was in his early 40s when I met him. Many of you met him when he was older and his body had gotten a little smaller like this. When he was young, he had this posture. And he was like Arjuna's bow, because that's what the bow represents. Arjuna in the Mahabharata, straight spine is the string, and this is the curve of the bow. And when Arjuna unstrung his bow because he didn't want to fight, his spine collapsed. That's what the image is. And Swami's posture was just like a strung bow, perfectly straight spine, and this like this. So I looked at him from the side once, and I noticed his heart was first. His intelligence was there, but his heart was first. And I thought about myself, and I often lean into life like that. Just trying to get my head a little ahead of my heart like that. I've tried to train myself semi-successfully. But what I realized was his intelligence was based on the purity and the courage of his heart. And that word, the word for that is he was fearless. And perfect love casts out all fear. He loved God. He knew that God loved him. He loved Master. He loved God in people. He was unafraid. And as a consequence of being unafraid, there was no bias. There was no necessity that it had to be a certain way to protect me. And as a consequence, he could just see things as they were. And nothing blocked the intelligence. And you see how the balance is? And what is the carping spirit? The carping spirit is always being protective, isn't it? I'm going to find out what's wrong. I'm going to find out what's wrong. And I'm going to show that I can find out what's wrong. Right? Isn't it interesting? Isn't it just so like no end to it? Master was asked, is there any end to evolution? He said, no, we keep on evolving individually, not the species. We keep on expanding until we achieve endlessness. You know, even the most simple ideas, if we just apply ourselves to them with energy, they just keep unfolding and unfolding and unfolding. The seed within us is destined to be infinite, and it will just keep growing until it becomes so. Bless us. Let's have a moment.
I've known them forever, they've haunted my slumber and called to me out of the deeps of space. The love that they promised has helped me remember another time, a caring embrace. Dark eyes in the morning, dark eyes in the evening, dark eyes in the starlight at end of days, dark eyes that speak silence, they whisper, come find me, you'll never know true love if you stay. Now I seek them in the winter time, oh I seek them in the spring. Those two dark eyes draw my heart away to where sun and moon sing. I laugh now in the summertime when ripples on the river play. I laugh soaring with the meadowlarks, love has made my heart gay. I laugh soaring with the meadowlarks, love has made my heart gay. I've known them forever, they've haunted my slumber and called to me out of the deeps of space. The love that they promised has helped me remember another time of caring embrace. They whisper, come find me, you'll never know true love if you stay. Now I seek them in the winter time, oh I seek them in the spring. Those two dark eyes draw my heart away to where sun and moon sing. I laugh now in the summertime when ripples on the river play. I laugh soaring with the meadowlarks, love has made my heart gay. thy joy fill our days. O Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. The time has come for us to see that there's but one reality upon the earth and high above, the truth that all was made from love. A love that calls to us to fly above the hills, above the sky, above the storms, above the pain, a land where peace and laughter reign. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Guide all our hopes and all our dreams, past every glow that only seems, into the light, the inner sun, into the truth that we're all one. Help us to find in every hour, in every thought, in every flow, a joy that spans eternity, the truth that makes us ever free. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. The time has come for us to see that there's but one reality upon the earth and high above, the truth that all was made from love. A love that calls to us to fly above the hills, above the sky, above the storms, above the pain, a land where peace and laughter reign. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Guide all our hopes and all our dreams, past every glow that only sees, into the light, the inner sun, into the truth that we're all one. Help us to find in every hour, in every thought, in every flow, a joy that spans eternity, the truth that makes us ever free. Oh, Master, may thy joy fill our days. Oh, Master, may thy wisdom guide our ways. Oh, Master, may thy joy